Hi, everybody. This is Jay Early, and I am the creator of the Pattern System and also Self-Therapy Journey. And this webinar is on the interpersonal patterns that are part of the Pattern System. As we're getting started, the first thing I want to do is just make sure that everything's working technically. So you will see that on the right side of your screen is a chat function. Actually, let me turn the chat on here. So please let me know in the chat if you're able to hear me and see me okay, or if there's any problems. And it usually takes about 20 seconds, I think, for when you actually type in the chat to when I see it. There's a little bit of a delay. So I guess I'll get started, but I will, looks like I may be speaking. I guess it's okay. I just thought I might be speaking a little too loudly. So let me just check and see how many people are here. Ooh, nobody. What's going on? Why do I not have any registrants? All right. That's not it. Let me go back to here. Oh, it looks like I've got a bunch of people. Okay, great. Sorry about that. I can see you. Yes, no problem. Okay, great. All right. So it looks like everything's working fine. Okay. I don't know why that other thing told me I didn't have any people on here. I see. There's at least 15 of you so far. All right, great. So we'll get started. So let me give you a little bit of my background. I'm a psychologist. I'm a psychotherapist. I have been practicing psychotherapy for about 40 years. And over a lot of that time, I have developed the pattern system, which is a systematic way of understanding personality in a way that's related to therapy or personal growth. In fact, why don't I switch over and start with my, here we go. Got a little PowerPoint presentation. So here's a little bit about this is still my introduction, but this is a little bit about the pattern system. You can think of it as a periodic table for psychology. And it gives you a detailed system for understanding the psychology of personality. Patterns, which are probably problematic ways of being and relating. Capacities, which are healthy ways of being and relating. And wounds, which are emotional wounds from childhood. So it deals with all three of those. And you can see on the right side of this slide is a chart of the interpersonal patterns, which is actually what we're going to be talking about today. And I'll get into that more in a little while. Now, a little bit more about me. I'm also an expert in internal family systems therapy, which I discovered in 2002. And found that it was so powerful that I've been using it ever since as my main method of therapy. And it integrates beautifully with the pattern system because the pattern system provides an understanding of the psychology, the content of your psychology, so to speak, whereas internal family systems therapy, IFS, provides a very powerful process or method for doing therapy. So one is the content and one is the process. You can think of it that way. And then the third thing about me is that I've developed a web application called Self-Therapy Journey, which is based on both IFS and the pattern system, and it's a way of working on yourself over the web using these things. And I'll talk about that later. And my passion is to bring IFS to the world and the pattern system to the world, and also to reach the large number of people who don't have access to therapy or prefer to work on their own with Self-Therapy Journey. Okay, now this webinar is on one aspect of the pattern system. The pattern system has a number of different groups of dimensions, And this webinar is on the 9 interpersonal dimensions in the pattern system. So it's a way of helping to understand the way you relate to other people, both the healthy ways you relate and the problematic ways you relate, and how you can transform the problematic ones into the healthy ones. And we'll talk about what a dimension is in the pattern system and how it's organized. And then after I've gone over, the main thing is going over the 9 interpersonal dimensions and all the patterns and capacities in those dimensions. And then I'll also talk briefly about how to transform patterns into capacities using IFS and or self-therapy journey, and then we'll give you some more resources. Okay, so let's see here. I want to do a couple polls. Okay, good. Looks like there's 20-some people here. So I want to set up a poll. Let's see, here we go. I do it here. So first question is, are you familiar with the pattern system? Please click yes or no. And I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Oh, wait, I have to start it first. There you go. Now you can click yes or no on whether you're familiar with the pattern system. Give me an idea about that. And okay, thank you. Looks like about 2/3 of you are. So now we'll end the poll. And oh, well, looks like I had another poll set up, but I'm not going to bother with that. All right, so let me go on to the next page. And oh, I know. I want to let you know that in addition to interacting with me through chat, which you're welcome to do anytime, and I will check the chat periodically and try to answer any of your questions, or you can just share stuff in the chat which will go out to me and everybody else. But if you'd like to actually interact with me verbally and or visually, you can actually do that. So you click on, there's an attendees thing on the right side, and then you can click request to speak, and then you will temporarily become a sort of a co-presenter, and which means you have to join Google Hangouts, which only takes a second. And then you can talk to me, and I can see you, and but you should know that this webinar is being recorded, so if you do that, you'll be part of the recording. And also, you have the option of just talking to me with your voice and turning off your webcam if you don't want to be seen. So that's that story. So here we are now. Let's take a look at the interpersonal dimensions of the pattern system. This is what we're here to talk about. So the first dimension, I'm going to just briefly go over them now and then go over them in more detail in a moment. So the first dimension is the intimacy dimension, which is deals with how you are in love relationships. And there's 2 healthy capacities, intimacy and self-support. And you like to, in a good love relationship, you like to have both of those. You like to be close to your partner and also really supporting yourself. And then there's 2 problematic patterns in that dimension, which is the dependent pattern, in which you become too dependent on your partner, and then the distancing pattern where you avoid intimacy. And each dimension has roughly that same structure. There's 2 or more healthy capacities, like in the conflict dimension, the 2 healthy capacities, well, there's 3. There's good communication on this side, and there's challenge and limit setting on that side. So you can challenge somebody, bring up a difficult issue you'd like to talk about that might lead to a conflict, but you can do it you can communicate well while you're doing that. And then the more extreme patterns are being judgmental or defensive on this side, or avoiding conflict on that side. And so you can see that each dimension has this same structure. The power dimension, there's assertiveness and cooperation, and then there's some problematic patterns, and so on. The care dimension has to do with how you take care of yourself and how you care for other people. The social dimension has to do with how you interact in social settings with confidence, or whether you're self-effacing, or whether you end up being a charmer. The strength dimension really has to do with anger and strength, like which I'll describe later. Trust is how much you trust other people. Honesty is how honest you are. And evaluation is how you perceive other people and feel about them. So these are the 9 interpersonal dimensions. And I'm going to start on the first. No, first we're going to start and look at how dimensions are organized. But before I do that, I'm going to go back here and check my chat. And, oh, the poll didn't show. Oh, that's weird. Oh, somebody says I can't hear or see you. If you haven't fixed that yet, sorry I didn't get to this sooner, I recommend going out of the webinar, logging back in again, clicking on the link again, going back in again, and see if it works that time. Somebody says I can see and hear the presentation, but the poll didn't do well. The presentation is not clear. You know, one possibility is I think that there is something in the lower right-hand corner of your screen where if you click on it, it makes the screen, the thing fill up most of your, or maybe all of your screen. So you might try that if it's not clear. That might help you to see the presentation. So thanks for all the feedback. And if anybody has any questions at this point, and I'm just getting started, so you may not, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat and I will be happy to answer them. And while I'm doing that, let me just undo this so you can actually see me. So let's see. The poll came up and disappeared. Oh, sorry about that. Well, poll's not a big deal anyway. Okay. If anybody's got questions about what I've covered so far, type them in the chat. Or, you know, the other thing I need to do is check to see if anybody wants to talk to me. Now, let's see. How do I do that? I think I go over here and that doesn't work. Let me go back here. Oh. Okay, view attendees. Here we go. So it looks like I should be able to see if anybody has requested to speak. There we go, and nobody has. Okay, I'm just learning how to do this. Okay. All right, so let's go on now. Let's go back to the presentation. And here it is. Okay. So each dimension is organized in a really cool way. And I'm going to illustrate this with the intimacy dimension, but actually all the dimensions are organized this way. So here in the intimacy dimension, this is a different way of looking at those rows I showed you in that chart. So at the bottom here are the 2 problematic patterns, the dependent pattern and the distancing pattern. Now, actually, let me start over here. Let's look at intimacy and dependence, because sometimes people mix those up. So intimacy is where you are able to really love your partner and be close to them and be connected to them and have affection and good sex and share important things and all the good things that make up for a healthy, intimate relationship. And some people try to achieve intimacy by sort of getting very dependent on your partner, or they may just fall. You may just fall into dependence, which is easy to do. That's actually been one of my issues in the past, is dependence, where you depend on your partner for your sense of well-being. You either depend on their being with you, so that if they go away for a weekend vacation without you, then you get early pain from childhood comes up. That used to happen to me. Or you depend on your partner to feel good about yourself. You depend on their appreciation of you, or their love for you, or their affection for you. And you don't have a good way of feeling solid and good about yourself without that. So that's a rough idea. That's a rough description of dependence. And so intimacy, in a way, is the healthy version of dependence, or to reverse it, dependence is a problematic version of intimacy, where you end up becoming dependent as part of getting close to your partner. And on the other side, some people try to avoid dependence by putting distance from your partner. So what you're really after is self-support. What you'd really like, and the ideal, is that you have these two together. You have intimacy and self-support naturally can be integrated with each other. That's why I put them in this sort of inverted yin-yang symbol, indicating that they integrate with each other. Whereas if you try to get self-support by creating distance from your partner in order to avoid being dependent, what you really end up with is distancing, and you don't have intimacy, because the distancing blocks the intimacy. So in a way, self-support is the healthy version of distancing, or distancing is the problematic version of self-support. And did you notice that dependence and distancing are kind of opposites? Polarization is a word in IFS that's used to describe two parts that are actually fighting each other, that they're really trying to take you in opposite directions. And then the last thing you can see on here is that intimacy transforms distancing. So if you've got a problem with distancing or avoiding intimacy, you need to develop intimacy. That's obvious. What might not be quite so obvious is you have a problem with dependency. What you need to develop is self-support. So that is the way each of the dimensions. This is not just, the other dimensions have different patterns and capacities, but the same organization holds. So this gives you an idea of how each dimension in the pattern system is organized. And it also gives you a sense of the intimacy dimension. Okay, let me go back now and check, and let me see if anybody's got questions about the intimacy dimension. Okay, so if anybody has questions about the intimacy dimension or any of these patterns or capacities that I mentioned, type away, or if you'd like to speak with me. Oh, it looks like, I wonder if, looks like Phoenix is actually requesting to speak. So I've actually tried this before. This will be cool. Okay, so I'm going to invite you, just invited you to be a speaker, Phoenix. And so go ahead and go through whatever. You should be getting some sort of information about how to become a speaker. And then hopefully you will show up down here and we can talk. Okay, and here, in the meantime, not just positive feedback. This is great, just positive feedback. It's great, makes a lot of sense. Great, thank you, Crystal. Okay, okay, so I'm not seeing, maybe Phoenix didn't request to speak, I can't tell. Anyway, if you did, I guess you'll show up at some point as a speaker down here. In the meantime, let's go on. So let's move on to the next one, the conflict dimension. This dimension has to do with how you deal with difficulties, how you deal with communicating about difficulties in a love relationship, or really any relationship. I mean, it usually applies to ongoing relationships, like a family relationship or a friendship or a work relationship, but it really could be anything. It could be any interaction you have with somebody. And so the healthy capacities are, the main ones are challenge and good communication. And what challenge means is, let's talk about a relationship. Let's suppose there's something about the relationship that you're not happy with. So if you have the challenge capacity, it means that you're capable of, and you do, bring that up with your partner. You know, you say, hey, there's something that I've got to, that I'd like to change. There's something that's not working for me, and I'd like to talk to you about it. And you bring it up with your partner, and you can talk about it. Now, the problem is, of course, that some of us do challenge by being judgmental instead. We bring it up with whoever it is, our partner or somebody else, but we bring it up in a judgmental way. Instead of saying, I'd like to talk to you about this thing that isn't working for me, we say, you don't treat me well, or you don't care about me, or you're selfish, or we call names, or we judge, so that's the judgmental pattern. And then, but what you'd like to have in addition to challenge is good communication, where instead of being judgmental, you can express your needs and your concerns in a way where you kind of own it. You say, when you do X, Y, Z, it upsets me, or it scares me, or it makes me feel like you don't care about me. So you're kind of owning it, and you're letting your partner know what they do that causes you problems, but you're not blaming them for it. You're kind of owning it. This is something, if some of you are familiar with nonviolent communication, this is something that they teach. And furthermore, once you get into the conflict and you start to talk about it, then the other person is going to bring up probably things that they're not happy with either. And if you have good communication, that capacity, it means you can listen to the other person without getting defensive, and you can see defensiveness is the other problematic pattern down here, which means that if somebody brings up a problem or something with you, that instead of really taking in what they're saying and listening to them and considering whether it's something that sounds valid and you might want to change, you get upset and you try to defend yourself. Oh no, I didn't do that. I don't do that kind of thing. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. And you kind of, and I should admit, by the way, that being both judgmental and defensive have been patterns that I'm well aware of. I've had a judgmental pattern my whole life. It's much improved, but I still fall into it occasionally. And I used to have quite a defensive pattern with my wife. I don't really do that anymore, because I learned that it didn't work. The more I defended myself, the more she judged me. So it really completely backfired, and I eventually got it and stopped defending myself. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that if somebody brings up something, accuses you of something that's not true, it doesn't mean that you don't explain what the truth is. But you do it in a healthy way through limit setting or the challenge capacity. Your aim is not to defend yourself because you're feeling bad or you're feeling threatened. Your aim is just to clear the air and, speak your truth. And you're also willing to consider that maybe there's some truth in what the other person's saying. It may not be all true, but there may be some truth in it. You're willing to look at yourself and consider whether there's truth in there. So you can see that judgmental and defensive are sort of problematic versions of challenge. And similarly over here, the extreme of good communication, where you're trying not to have problems in a conflict, is where you avoid conflict altogether. So of course you don't have any problems, but you also don't resolve anything. So watch out for that, because some people don't realize that. They think, oh, I've got a problem with my partner, but I can really just work it through myself. Or, maybe it's my issue. Or even if it's their issue, I can figure it out. Or I don't need to bring it up. I can live with it the way it is. Or maybe you don't even let yourself be aware of things that are bothering you, because then you might have to bring them up. So that's the conflict avoiding pattern. And of course, the results of that are that things that are problematic in the relationship never get dealt with. And so they gradually fester and get worse and worse. And you think everything's great because you're not having any fights, but actually usually people end up getting more and more distant from each other. Or somebody blows up. You've avoided, and you can't do it anymore, and so you blow up and you go major into the judgmental and also the angry pattern, which is in a different dimension. And that leads to a major conflict that goes nowhere. And then you say to yourself, well, see, I was right. I should have avoided the conflict. But that's not the solution. The solution is to use your challenge capacity to engage the conflict, but to do it with good communication. Okay, let me go back now and see so let me, if you got any questions. Oh, right, I didn't talk about limit setting. That's a good point. So basically, the other thing that can happen is if you're in a conflict and the other person is really not treating you well, they're really angry, or they're really coming at you with nasty, judgmental stuff, sometimes you actually need to set a limit. Sometimes you need to say, the way you're treating me is not appropriate. Let's take a break so that we can do it when you're not so charged up. And also when I'm not so charged up, which is usually the case. And then if the person won't agree, you say, look, I'm taking a break. I'm going into the other room. So you basically can set limits so you're not harmed by the other person. That's the limit setting capacity. That's why it's in here. Okay. Phoenix says self-limits are important too. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but in a sense, using good communication is a way of limiting where you might go with being judgmental or angry. So maybe that's what you're talking about. So that is a form of limiting oneself, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Bingo. What if anger is feared because of tons of unresolved anger? Yeah, well, that's what happens. Thank you. Some people avoid conflict because they're afraid of their own anger, because they've got lots of unresolved anger. Well, in that case, well, there's two things. One is you can really work on not acting out your anger, even if you're triggered. But the other, of course, the even better way is to actually work on your angry pattern and work on transforming it. And that's one of the patterns in a later dimension that we'll be talking about today. And then later on in the talk, I will talk about how to actually work on these patterns and how to change them using IFS and self-therapy journey. Okay. So let me just check one more time and see if anybody seems to want to talk to me verbally. Nope. Okay. So we'll go back to the chat, and that takes care of the conflict dimension. So I'm going to go back here. I guess this is still up. Let's move on to the third dimension. Now, this is an interesting one because everybody knows about conflict. Everybody knows that we get into conflicts and how do you deal with them, and everybody's aware of the need for good communication. Power is also really important in relationships. Any kind of relationship, not just love relationships. In fact, it comes really into the fore in work relationships and family relationships. And it's not necessarily something we pay attention to so much. So let's take a look at the power dimension. The two healthy capacities are assertiveness and cooperation. So assertiveness means you have your own personal power. You can say, this is what, you know what you want, and you can ask for it. You can say, this is what I want, or you can say, this is what I don't want. I don't want that. Or you can say, this is what I think would be best. It's not always about what you want. Sometimes you want to assert what you think will be best for the two of you, or if you're in a group, sort of what would be best for the group. So assertiveness is knowing what you want or what you believe is best, and being able to speak up for it, or not always even speaking up for, reaching out for what you want, initiating what you want. That's all assertiveness. Cooperation is the ability to cooperate with other people, to allow other people to also be assertive, sometimes to be receptive to what other people want or what other people think is best, or to work it out. So, or sometimes even to empower other people to be assertive and to have power. But sometimes to work it through, like sometimes somebody asserts something and you say, well, I agree with part of that, but there's part of it that I don't agree with. So you're using both your assertiveness and your cooperation, and you're very willing to work it through with the person and find out something that will work best for both of you or for a whole group. So this is not necessarily about a conflict situation. This could be just about, I'd like to do this and the other person wants to do that, or all kinds of things. So now, where does this go wrong? So on the right side is you can be assertive, but you're too assertive. Sometimes it's called aggressive, but I'm going to call it controlling, is where you not only can assert yourself, but you basically need to be in charge. You need to be basically running the show. By the way, I need to eat fairly frequently because I have to eat very small meals. So I may munch on stuff. I'm just munching on a cracker right now. I may munch on stuff a little bit as we go. So the controlling pattern is where you're overly assertive, where you have to run the show and you don't really cooperate with other people. The other way that you can get extreme is the rebel pattern, where you don't need to run the show, but where you're overly reactive to other people asserting power. So if somebody else asserts power, you'd like to be able to cooperate where it feels appropriate, to work together with people. But if you have a rebel pattern, any assertion of power from somebody else may scare a part of you and make you believe that they're going to control you. And the one thing the rebel pattern wants is to preserve your autonomy. And it kind of goes overboard with the rebel. If you got a rebel pattern, that part of you that's a rebel tends to, cut off your nose to spite your face. So you'll fight against things that you even might agree with because it came from somebody else. Or whenever somebody is taking charge, even if they're doing good things, you feel a need to rebel against them because you're afraid that they're going to control you. So that's the controlling pattern. And of course, those are extremes, dysfunctional extremes of assertiveness. And what you need, if you have either the controlling or the rebel pattern, what you need to transform it is to develop the cooperation capacity. Now, on the other side of the power dimension are two other patterns, people-pleasing and passive-aggressive. So let me start with people-pleasing. If you have a people-pleasing pattern, you go overboard to cooperate with others. You're always cooperating. Sometimes you don't even know what you want or what you think or what you feel because you're so invested in pleasing the other person or the group that you're in. You may think of yourself as a very kind, cooperative, caring person, and you may be, but you go overboard. You don't know how to assert yourself. or you don't believe that you have a right to assert yourself, or you don't even let yourself know what you want or what you think so that you could assert yourself. And often there's a fear that if I don't please people, they're not going to like me or they're going to reject me. By the way, I really should say, I haven't been doing this, but that all of these patterns are involved usually with fears. Like I mentioned, that the rebel is afraid of being controlled. The people pleaser is often afraid of being rejected or ostracized or even attacked if they don't please people. The controlling pattern may also be afraid of being controlled, or if you have a controlling pattern, you might be afraid of other things, of being rejected, or you might be afraid of things getting chaotic. So the reason I'm saying this, and I probably should have said it sooner, because it applies to all the patterns. Let me go back. The conflict avoiding person is afraid of being hurt in a conflict. The judgmental pattern person is afraid of not getting what they want. And the defensive person is afraid of being made to feel bad about themselves, and so on. So the point I'm making here is that these patterns, these problematic patterns, are enacted by parts of us. Maybe I should get a little into IFS. Probably a lot of you know IFS, or at least know something about it. But let me just say, IFS works with parts, with subpersonalities, with different. It's almost like you have little people inside of you that have different feelings and different motivations and goals, and so usually if you have one of these patterns, it means there's a part of you that enacts the pattern. So let's go to the people-pleasing, since that's the last one I was talking about. If you have a people-pleasing pattern, it means there's a part of you that goes out of your way to please people. And that part is driven probably, well, there's a number. You'd actually have to go in and get to know the part, your people-pleasing part, using IFS to find out exactly what it's afraid of. I can't tell you because it's not the same for all people-pleasing parts. But the kind of things that people-pleasing parts tend to be afraid of are, I'm going to be rejected if I don't please you. I'm going to be abandoned, or I won't be cared for. Or it's the opposite. If I please you, then you'll care for me. Or if I please you, you'll love me. So it can be either what I'm afraid of or what I'm trying to get by pleasing people. And that's true for all the patterns. And so these patterns, it's really good to honor all your parts, including the parts with the problematic patterns, because you know that these parts are just trying to either get something that you need or protect you from something that they're afraid of. Now, usually these patterns developed in childhood. And so the fears that these parts have, and these parts that have these fears are often kind of stuck in childhood. They don't quite realize that you're an adult with all of the capacities you have and the sports you have. They still may think you're a little kid under the power of your parents, or a certain parent when the parent was angry, or whoever. And so all they can think of is, oh my God, I've got to please people, or otherwise something terrible is going to happen. Like sometimes it's afraid of anger. If I don't please you, you're going to really light into me. So just to know that all of these patterns come from parts of us that are just doing their best to protect us from pain, or to get us something like love or attention that we desperately need, or at least that we needed as a child. And so even though these parts can transform and give up their roles because they're not really needed anymore, there's a reason why they originally took on these roles in childhood, and they should be respected while you're working on transforming them. So don't feel bad if you have any of these patterns, and don't judge the parts of you that have the patterns, because we all have patterns. As long as I'm talking, I have had quite a rebel pattern in my life. I used to get quite defiant and got me in trouble. And I still do sometimes. So that's a pattern of mine. Okay, so let's move on to the fourth one here, the passive-aggressive pattern. Now, this is a very interesting one. The passive-aggressive pattern looks on the surface a lot like the people-pleasing pattern. The passive-aggressive pattern usually involves two parts. One part is a people-pleasing part. It's saying, oh my God, I've got to please people. I've got to give them what they want, even if it's not good for me. Even if it's not what I want, I have to please people. But the other side of the passive-aggressive pattern is an indirect unconscious rebel pattern. So the passive-aggressive pattern is actually a combination of these two, people-pleasing and rebel. There's a conscious, direct people-pleasing and an unconscious, indirect rebel. So what happens if you have a passive-aggressive pattern is somebody asks you to do something, right away you say yes, without even considering whether it's something that you want to do or you have time to do. And if you had a people-pleasing pattern, that would be it. You would just say yes, and then you would go ahead and do it. But if you've got a passive-aggressive pattern, you say yes, but then the rebel part of you, which is usually unconscious, in this case, if you have a regular rebel pattern, it's often conscious, but with a passive-aggressive, it's usually unconscious. The rebel part says, you're going to end up controlling me because I just agreed to this thing I don't even want to do. Well, I'm not going to let that happen. So I've agreed to do this, and I don't really feel I have the right to rebel outwardly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not do what I agreed to do. Or I'm going to do it, but I won't really do it the way you wanted me to do it. I'll do it differently. In fact, sometimes when you're in that passive-aggressive place, you're actually angry at the person because you feel like they're trying to control you, even if they're not. I mean, sometimes they are, because maybe they have a controlling pattern. That's a real interesting one. When you've got one person with a controlling pattern and the other person with a passive-aggressive pattern, that's a real recipe for difficulties. Because the passive-aggressive rebel, unconscious rebel part says, don't you try to control me. And so I'll do what you ask, but I won't really do it the way you want it. I'll change it around more like what I want, and it'll frustrate you. And I'm happy to frustrate you because I'm angry at you for trying to control me. And actually, sometimes the unconscious in the passive-aggressive really just is an angry part. It's not even a rebel. It's just angry about something. And so the passive aggression is a way of unconsciously, indirectly expressing the anger. Like somebody sends you an email and invites you to something. And if you're being passive-aggressive, you simply don't respond. You don't say, no, I don't want to do it. And you don't say, yes. You just don't respond. That'll get them. They won't know what to do. You know, there's lots of different ways passive aggression can show up. I'm just giving you a few examples. And since this is not a webinar on the passive aggressive pattern, I won't go into more detail. I think I actually did a webinar on the passive aggressive pattern. So if you're interested, you can get that in the store and watch that webinar. Okay, so that's the power dimension. So let me see if anybody's got, so you got questions on the power dimension or anything I've talked about so far, pop them in the chat. So Phoenix says, is that disavowed anger? Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to now. Oh, right. I was talking about the people-pleasing pattern. Oh, the passive-aggressive, right? Yeah, that is disowned anger, except it's not completely disowned. It's kind of acted out. But yeah, it is just disowned anger. That's true, and that is one of the patterns that we'll get to a little while. Okay, D. Michael, attendees may not be aware that there are extensive modules in STJ, which is self-therapy journey, to develop and understand patterns and capacities. Yes, that's right. Thanks, Mike. And I'll talk later about self-therapy journey, because that's one really good way to work on this stuff, to learn more about it and work on it. Mike, do you think the rebel shows up due to being over-controlled by parents or other persons of power in the person's past life? Yes, that's a common reason for it. If you've been over-controlled, well, you can, I mean, that doesn't always produce the rebel pattern. Sometimes it produces the people-pleasing pattern because you end up going along with it. But if you've got a part of you that wants to fight against it, yeah, that's exactly what will produce the rebel pattern. Okay. Okay. Okay, Phoenix and Connie are talking. That's great. Feel free to talk with each other as much as you want. Okay. So I don't see any other comments so far. Oh, looks like there's a little thing here. It looks like somebody may want to actually talk to me. Oh, yes. Okay. Huh. So I've got Phoenix. I've got you marked as wanting to talk to me. Oh, maybe I didn't do the right thing. Let's see now. It says converting attendee into presenter. And now it's stopped. Well, hopefully that will, if you still do want to talk to me verbally, Phoenix, hopefully that will make it possible. So hopefully something will show up on your screen telling you what to do next, so you can actually talk to me. And meanwhile, let's go on. Okay, so this was the power dimension. Let's go to the next one, the care dimension. All right, now this is interesting in a different way. So I want to make a distinction between caring and caretaking, because many people don't get this. They think, oh, I'm a caring person. I care for people. I don't want them to be in pain. I want them to feel good. I want to nurture them, which is all great. But do you do that instead of taking care of yourself? If you do, then you have a caretaking pattern. So you see, ideally, caring and self-care go together. That you do care for other people, but not at the expense of your own needs. That you're aware of both your needs and other people's needs, and you can dance between the two. You can make sure, do your best to have your needs taken care of and someone else's. So you're not sacrificing yourself for someone else unless it's a really conscious choice and there's a really good reason for the sacrifice. So the care, and also the caretaking pattern, the caring pattern, the caring capacity, I should say, tends to come just from your heart, just from loving someone and wanting them to be happy. The caretaking pattern often comes, as all these patterns do, from fear. Like, if I don't take care of you, you're going to, similar to people pleasing, if I don't take care of you, maybe you won't love me, maybe you'll reject me, maybe you'll abandon me. Or if I do take care of you, maybe I can get you to appreciate me or love me or support me. So the caretaking is not just from your heart, it's driven by unconscious or sometimes conscious pain or need. And so if you have the caretaking pattern, you want to develop self-care. Now, of course, the other side of it is you can go too far in the self-care direction. You can become self-absorbed, where you're not caring enough about other people. You're too concerned you're like more exclusively concerned about your own needs and desires, and not enough paying attention to what other people might need that you're interacting with. So that's the self-absorbed pattern. And then a version of that, a similar pattern, is the entitled pattern, where you're also very caught up with your own needs, but you see the self-absorbed pattern, you sort of just don't pay attention to other people's needs, but in the entitled pattern, you actually see other people as extensions of yourself. Not only do you not pay attention to their needs, you don't even realize that they're separate people in some sense. I mean, of course, we all know they're separate people, but at a psychological level, you see other people as being extensions of yourself. And so everything needs to revolve around you. And I know that sounds terrible, but it's no worse than being a caretaker. It's no different. You know, it's like all these patterns on the right side here are what I call hard patterns, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And they are patterns that it's harder for us to admit that we have. Like I have a self-absorbed pattern sometimes where I really am so caught up in my own fears and whatever that I'm not really able to be caring for somebody. Especially in social settings where that brings out my fears. You know, when I'm doing therapy, it's no problem. My caring capacity is right there. But in some other settings, it's not. And so I guess what I'm saying is don't feel bad about having any of these patterns over on the right side. They sound terrible, don't they? But they're no worse than anything else. They're just another way of trying to cope with unresolved underlying psychological issues. So I'm kind of extending what I said originally, don't feel bad about having any of these patterns. I want to say especially don't feel bad about the patterns on the right side. See, controlling, rebel, judgmental, defensive, distancing. They sound like things we don't want to admit to. But I just want to say they are no worse than the ones on the left side. They're just different ways of coping. And so here, if you've got either self-absorbed or entitled, you need to develop caring. If you have caretaking, you need to develop self-care. So you can see how the pattern system works. It tells you, it helps you distinguish between a problematic and a healthy capacity pattern. And it also tells you what is needed to transform any pattern you have. It's right built into the system itself. Okay, so that's the care dimension. I'm now going back to look at the chat again. Okay. Caretaker can also arise as a result of not being able to care for loved ones in the past and thus feeling guilty. Interesting, Mike. Yeah, that sounds right. Very good. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. Okay, good. Care and caretaking for me was my way of coping with a narcissistic mother. Right. So your narcissistic mother probably trained you to care for her instead of taking care because she wasn't paying attention to your needs since she was narcissistic. And so you got trained in it. Yeah, thank you, by the way. That's another way that these patterns can develop. They in addition to being driven by underlying fears or needs, they can also be conditioned by the way you were treated by a parent in childhood. So Karen is giving us an example of that. Great. Yes, we're all human. Yeah. That has been my pattern. Like, okay, yeah, great, folks. Okay, let's continue. So the next dimension is the social dimension. So here, well, let's start looking at the problematic patterns. The self-effacing pattern is where in social settings you kind of hang back. It's often shy people are self-effacing, or maybe you don't feel very confident, or you feel bad about yourself, and so you don't speak up. That's another way of being self-effacing. Or you don't reach out to people because you're afraid of being rejected or ridiculed if you reach out for connection with people. Those are all examples of the self-effacing pattern. And if you have that, of course, what you'd like to develop is social confidence, where you feel confident, you know that you can reach out to people, and you're confident that Some of them at least will connect with you, and you're not worried if somebody doesn't. And you feel good enough about yourself that it's okay to speak up and say what you think, or just shoot the breeze. So that's what you'd like to have. But now the extreme of that is what I call the charmer pattern, where not only are you socially confident, but you are overly invested in charming people, either by being funny or entertaining, telling entertaining stories, or being charismatic, or being seductive. Those are all different ways of being charming. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. Those are all properties of social confidence. What makes you a charmer is if you're overly invested in charming people. You're not just coming from your confidence and your desire to connect with people. You have a need to be the center of attention. You have a need for everybody to think you're wonderful. And you get more invested in entertaining people or seducing them or charming them than in making contact with them. Because if you have social confidence, what you really do is you just connect with people. But if you're a charmer, you kind of want to be the center of the show, and you want everybody to think you're wonderful, and that's your way of connecting. But it doesn't actually completely work, because you're so busy performing that you may not actually get the contact you want. You may get your ego stroked, but that's not what we all really want. We all really want connection. And again, as I said, don't feel bad if you're a charmer. That's no worse than being self-effacing. It's just a different way of dealing with, with our underlying issues. So if you have the charmer, what you need to develop is genuineness, where you're just being yourself and you're not ramping it up in order to charm people or entertain them or get them to laugh. I mean, not that you won't be funny, but you're not overly invested in it. So that's the social dimension. Okay, I'll go back and see. Oh, this is cool. A way I figured out the difference between caring and caretaking is I am preventing another from using their voice. Oh, I see. So you might actually go overboard in terms of caretaking, so much so that you prevent somebody from being assertive. Yeah, that can happen. Yeah, caretaking can actually be sometimes integrated with the controlling pattern. I think that's what you're talking about. Okay. Let's see. Good point. I know my husband feels that my mother's caretaking is controlling, but I think it is easy to understand to say our caretaking ignores his voice. Yeah, well, that's just different ways of looking at the same thing. Yeah, good. My understanding of charmer is that there's manipulation involved. Exactly. Thank you. I should have said that. Very good, Karen. Yeah, that's right. Almost always with the charmer, there's manipulation. If everybody likes a charmer, maybe they can feel worthwhile. It doesn't seem to work, though. Well, sometimes it does. I mean, sometimes it helps you to feel worthwhile, but you sort of know at a deep level that it's built on manipulation, and so it doesn't quite do the job. So yeah, you're right. And also, it doesn't get you contact, which is another really important thing we all want in social settings. Phoenix, Kate, yes, and NVC helped me to realize that it's important to understand what another is really experiencing. Right, yeah, that's crucial. Mike says, don't understand what you mean. Well, that's part of good communication and caring, is actually being able to tune into what somebody else is experiencing and relate to them based on your sense of what's going on with them. I think that's what Phoenix is talking about. Okay, good discussions, folks. All right, let's continue. So this was the social dimension. So let's go to the strength dimension. So this has some interesting stuff in it too. So I want to make a distinction between anger and strength, because very often we get angry in order to have strength. So if somebody does something that hurts you, or something that frustrates you, or something that threatens you, you might get angry at them, and that's fine. And if it's not overdone, that's not a big deal. But what you really want is strength. What you really want is the ability to be strong and firm and assert yourself or set limits. I mean, it's some of these other capacities. We talked about limit setting, assertiveness, challenge. So this is related to all of those. That if you're frustrated with something, or you feel that somebody's wronged you, you get angry. But the healthy capacity you're really looking for there is strength. Is the ability to stand up for yourself, set limits, say no, be strong. And a lot of us get angry in order to develop strength, because we don't know any other way. And so sometimes we go overboard and we get really angry. We go into a rage, or we get punitive, or we get, what's the word I'm thinking of? We want revenge because we feel like somebody's really hurt us. But that's the angry pattern, any of those, the rage, the revenge, the hatred. But the thing to remember is that those are really ways, the healthy version of anger is strength. And what you'd like to have, if you overdo the anger, you tend to get angry too easily or too strongly, or you can't control your anger and it gets you in trouble, or people are scared of you. What you want is the centered capacity, where when you're angry, you don't lose it. You're centered, so that even though you feel angry, you can come from strength because you're centered and you don't get taken over by your anger. It doesn't run you. You're centered, so you're separate from the anger. And therefore it doesn't get out of control, and you don't hurt other people. And most importantly, what often happens with the anger pattern is the other person gets angry back at you, and you have a screaming match, and that goes nowhere, and can even damage your relationship, and often does. So what you like to have is the centered capacity, so you don't get carried away with your anger, and the strength capacity, so that you have the strength and firmness and assertiveness that the anger is really all about anyway. But of course, the other side of this is disowned anger. There are many people who rarely or never get angry, and maybe don't even feel angry because they've disowned their anger. They don't think it's safe to be angry. Maybe it wasn't safe as a child to be angry. Maybe you got hurt worse whenever you got angry. And so you learned to stuff your anger because it's not safe. And you grow up as an adult, and you imagine that you're just being an ordinary, respectful, caring person, and you get along with people, and you never get angry, and it all seems wonderful. But because you've disowned your anger, you've also disowned your strength. And so you can't stand up for yourself. You can't assert yourself. You can't set limits. You can't challenge, because you've disowned your strength along with your anger. And so in that case, what you want to develop is strength. And as a way of getting there, you may even first want to develop your ability to feel your anger and your ability to express your anger, even though And this is why it's important to understand the difference between anger and strength. Even though you're not ultimately aiming to relate to people and solve problems through anger, you may have to own the anger first in order to have your strength. If you've disowned your anger, first you've got to re-own the anger, feel the anger, learn how to express it, maybe not with other people that you're angry at, maybe doing it a little bit, maybe on your own, maybe with your therapist, maybe on your own, pounding a pillow or whatever, but you get your anger back, and therefore you get your strength back, and then you can practice relating to people from the strength rather than the anger, but now you haven't disowned the strength or the anger. So that's what you're aiming for if you've got disowned anger. Okay, so that takes care of this dimension. I will check back again and see how our chats are going. Okay, let's see. Lots of interesting stuff. Okay. Oh, you guys are just having nice chats with each other. Great, let's see. Some people always need others to tell them they're worthwhile. Yeah, okay, yeah. True, Phoenix, and we still want to support them can be difficult because they may feel the support is just because we don't want them to feel bad, or we are nice and tolerate them because we're nice people. Yeah, okay, good discussion. Phoenix, Jay, I'm trying to develop feeling anger safely. Yeah, well, you know what I would recommend is work on feeling the anger when you're not with the person you're angry at. You know, maybe we have a third person there who can just support you in feeling the anger, or maybe even expressing it but first to feel it, and then maybe to express it by just yelling or pounding on a pillow. That's a good way to re-own your anger in a situation where it is safe because the person you're angry at isn't there. And then you can gradually practice relating to other people when you're angry from strength rather than from anger. I'm trying to have empathy for myself. How to do that? You probably mean having compassion for yourself, because empathy means resonating with what someone else is feeling. So we kind of always have empathy for ourselves. But the biggest thing is to open your, actually IFS is a great way to develop compassion for yourself, because with IFS, it actually breaks it down. It's not just having compassion for yourself, it's having compassion for each one of your parts. So in IFS, you get to know a certain part, let's say a people-pleasing part, and you end up feeling compassion for that part because you recognize that it's trying to please people to avoid being abandoned, say. Or maybe you get in touch with the abandoned part, which is called an exile in IFS. And that's even easier because the abandoned part will be in pain. And then your natural response to a part of you that's in pain will be compassion, unless it's blocked by something. So that's the other thing. If you are in touch with a part of you that is in pain and you're not feeling compassion for that part, that means that there's some other part, probably a protector, what IFS calls a protector, that's blocking your compassion, blocking your heart. So you find that protector and you ask it to step aside so that your heart can be open to that young child part of you that's in pain. Okay, Paul says, could you define strength? Yes, strength is firmness, assertiveness, personal power. It's the ability to stand up for yourself, to set limits, to things like that. So you're strong, but you can do that without having to be angry. Although, as I said before, anger can lead to strength. But strength is what you're really after. Okay, let's move on. the trust dimension. Okay, so we all know that we would like to be able to trust other people, but of course, sometimes other people can't be trusted. So how do you tell? So what you'd like to have is you'd like to be basically trusting of people, but you'd also like to be perceptive, so that if someone is manipulating you or isn't telling you everything, or for some other reason isn't necessarily completely trustworthy, you can tell. So that your attitude toward people is a basic one of trust, but you're also perceptive enough to know when someone shouldn't be trusted about something. Maybe they're not overall shouldn't be trusted, but you can tell. I mean, we've already talked about a number of patterns, like the charmer and the passive-aggressive pattern, where if somebody has one of those patterns, you can't entirely trust them. And there are others, like the deceptive pattern, and the next thing is another one where you can't trust somebody. But you'd like to overall be trusting. But now the extreme of perceptiveness is the suspicious pattern, where you basically don't trust anybody, or where it's very, very difficult for you to trust anyone. And of course, this usually happens because you've been treated badly as a child. In fact, maybe because you were betrayed as a child or abandoned. And so you actually did trust someone, and then they turned on you or they left you. And so you're left with feeling suspicious. And if you have the suspicious pattern, it means that you're basically suspicious of most people, even if they're not really doing anything where you need to be suspicious. And it's hard for you to trust people. And in fact, people with a suspicious pattern end up, the only way they can trust somebody is if the other person really comes out with a lot of negative stuff. Then they say, okay, now I can trust them because the negative stuff is out there. If the person's not coming out with it, the suspicious person says, I wonder what they're not telling me. I wonder what they're not saying, and I don't trust them. And then, of course, the other extreme on the other side is the gullible pattern, where you're too easily trusting. You miss red flags. You don't see a sign that someone is deceiving you or manipulating you. You just trust everybody, and it gets you in trouble. So if you've got the gullible pattern, you want to develop perceptiveness. If you've got the suspicious pattern, you want to develop trust. So that's the trust dimension. And it's also, again, it's always good to be able to distinguish between the ones on the same side. So you want to know the difference between trust and gullibility. And you want to know the difference between perceptiveness and having a suspicious pattern. And it's basically how universal it is. If you've got trust and perceptiveness, they go back and forth, and you can be perceptive and you can also trust where it belongs. But if you take this to the extreme, you get that. And if you take this to the extreme, you get that. Okay. Let's go back and check my chat stuff. Is strength in the self-leadership book? I'm not sure. There isn't a self-leadership book. There's a self-therapy book, which doesn't cover any of these patterns. The self-therapy book is really about IFS. It's about the IFS process. Yeah, so no, it's not in that book, if that's what you're talking about. How do we increase our perceptiveness? Well, the first thing is to recognize that you've got a gullible pattern, so that you start watching for red flags. This especially comes up in the early stages of love relationships, where you're kind of you're infatuated with the other person. You don't want to see the red flags, so you ignore them. Well, if you want to be perceptive, you don't ignore, you check. But the other thing you can do is, if you have a gullible pattern, is you can check to see what it is that drives you to ignore red flags. By the red flags, I mean signs that the person may not be completely trustworthy in certain areas or certain things that they say. It doesn't mean that they're a jerk. It just means that maybe certain things that they say can't be completely trusted. That's what I mean by a red flag. But the other thing I'm saying is that if you have a gullible pattern, there's something there. Like maybe there's the gullible part is invested in not seeing red flags because it's so needy. Or because could be something else. But so it would also be really helpful to explore what's driving the over trustfulness. Okay. Is coming from a violent background, you learn to be suspicious. How do you know when your antenna is accurate? Yeah. Well, again, the first step is knowing that you've got a suspicious pattern. If you do, then you have to be suspicious of your suspiciousness. Like when you feel suspicious, you have to ask yourself, is this person really showing me a sign that I need to be suspicious, or do I just do this with everybody? And of course, what you can also do is try out trusting somebody. It's not all or nothing, and it's not either, oh, I trust you completely, or forget it, I wouldn't go near you. You can temporarily trust somebody. You can try it out. You can say, okay, I will trust you. I will reveal a little more of myself to you, or I'll let myself get closer to you, or I'll agree to work with you around this. But I won't just, but I'll also keep my eyes open to see if there's a problem. And then again, the other thing you can do is to really work with that suspicious part and see if you can heal some of the pain. Because the suspicious part is a protector in IFS, which means it's protecting an exile. In your case, I guess an exile who was physically abused, if you have a violent background in your childhood. So the more you can heal that exile that's been physically abused, the less the suspicious part will need to be suspicious. So that's another way to go. Okay. Gullible people, it's not quite the same as idealization. Actually, that's in the next thing. Gullible people don't necessarily idealize others, but they trust too easily. They don't sort of check to see, oh, is this safe? Like I remember I did this once. This was a minor thing, but years ago, my wife and I were going to go on an RV trip, and we checked around. We were going to rent an RV from, I don't know if I can't remember now whether it was an individual or a company, but I'm just kind of tooling along saying, okay, they said this, they say that, great, we'll rent it, we'll go. And my wife is saying, well, wait a minute, check to make sure that, I don't even remember what it was now, but check to make sure that they're reliable, or that they are, mean what they say, or, check to see what you're signing. There's like, I was just trusting them without really paying attention. And she pointed out that that was not necessarily wise. Okay. But it's not the same as idealizing people. I didn't think they were wonderful. I just, didn't pay attention to whether they should be trusted or not. Okay. So the honesty dimension. So here, so let's talk about this deceptive pattern to start with. That's where you deceive people. You don't tell them the entire truth. You tell them what they want to hear, or you leave out important things that would really upset them. You have an affair and you don't tell your spouse, or you You know, you're making an agreement with somebody and you don't tell them all of the contingencies or whatever it might be. That's the deceptive pattern. And of course, the healthy version of that is where you're tactful, you know. But if you have a deceptive pattern, obviously what you want to develop is honesty, but not necessarily blunt all the time in your face honesty. That would be the blunt pattern, where you are not only honest, but you don't care how much it hurts people when you're honest. You just blurt it out. And that can be unnecessarily hurtful. So honesty is something that's a basic way you'd like to be, but you don't necessarily always want to be honest about everything or completely honest. You want to be tactful. You want to be basically honest, but also do it in a way that doesn't hurt somebody, or at least doesn't unnecessarily hurt someone. I mean, if you need to say something that's honest and it is going to hurt someone, you may need to say it anyway. But you're not going to say it in a blunt, you know, harsh way. You're going to try, even there, you may be honest, but you're going to try to say it in the nicest possible way. And in some cases with the tact capacity, you actually may choose not to say something because it's going to really hurt somebody, and it may not be necessary to say that. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, and you can distinguish. Whereas if you have the blunt pattern, you know, you just belt it out there, irregardless of its impact on other people. Okay, and then of course, if you have the blunt pattern, you need to develop tact, and if you have the deceptive, you need to develop honesty. So that's that pattern. So I will check back again. Okay. What are the best ways to develop tact? I grew up in a blunt family and have those tendencies. You know, the biggest way is to be attuned to how other people are likely to receive what you're saying. To be aware of, I mean, you don't want to completely trip yourself up, but you want to be able to basically ask yourself, this thing I'm about to say, if I say it, how is it likely to impact this person, or how is it likely to impact this group? And you may decide, you know what, it's fine, it's not going to bother them. Or you may decide, you know what, it may bother them somewhat, but it's important enough to me that I want to say it anyway. Or you may decide, my God, it's going to upset them so much and it's not that important to me, so I won't say it. So that's what I would say. The best way to develop tact is to really develop your attunement to other people. And you can develop by kind of like noticing, when I say things, how does it impact people? And maybe even ask them how it impacts them if you know somebody who'll be honest with you. And that'll gradually develop your ability to predict how it's likely to impact people. Okay. And then, of course, you want to check to see if you're getting something from being blunt. If there's a second, you know, if you're getting off on being blunt, then you'll need to work on that. Okay. And then the last one is the evaluation dimension. And here the healthy capacities are appreciation and perceptiveness. So it means you're able to appreciate someone and appreciate their good qualities and their strengths and their potential and what they might develop into and their feelings, all of that. But you also want to be perceptive so that you're not willy-nilly just idealizing somebody and thinking they're wonderful. It's similar to, you know, what we talked about in terms of gullibility, but here the perceptiveness is to keep you from being an idealizer. So the idealizing pattern is where you decide that somebody is just wonderful and you can't see any weaknesses. You don't want to see any weaknesses in them. You unconsciously avoid, you know, and usually it's somebody that you have some connection with, or somebody that you imagine a connection with, like it's going to be somebody in the media or an actress or a sports figure or whatever. but you idealize them as a way of kind of participating in how wonderful they are. So you think they're wonderful, and if you have some connection to them, real or imagined, that kind of brings you into their wonderfulness as well. Or sometimes idealizing is a way of, well, if I just let you know how wonderful you are and feel how wonderful you are, then maybe you'll take care of me and make my life work. So that's with somebody you actually have a connection with. Sometimes the idealizing, sometimes people do it with a partner. Of course, we all idealize people at first when we fall in love with them. That's sort of natural to the falling in love process. But hopefully you'll get wise before too long and stop idealizing them and start to see them for who they really are, which may be a wonderful person, but you can also see the ways that they're not perfect or the ways that they cause problems for you. And then, of course, the extreme of perceptiveness, as you might imagine, is being judgmental, where you can't appreciate the person at all. The only thing you can see is their shortcomings. So here, the only thing you can see is their good qualities, or you may even imagine good qualities that they don't have. And with the judgmental pattern, the only thing you can see is their shortcomings, and you may even imagine shortcomings that they don't have because you're getting off on being judgmental, because it's a way of feeling good about yourself. It's a way of feeling better than other people, things like that. Okay. And of course, if you've got a judgmental pattern, you want to learn to develop the ability to appreciate others. And if you've got the idealizing pattern, you need to develop perceptiveness. Okay, back to, so Phoenix, hi guys, being curious, I found out that the question button is down to the left, but Jay is just checking chat. So, oh, I see. So thank you, Phoenix. So I guess by the question button, you mean the button where you tell me that you want to talk with me. You just found it and it's down on the left. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Phoenix. So we still have a little time left in case anybody does want to talk to me. You can click on that. I'm checking now to see if anybody has clicked on it. Looks like nobody has. Okay. All right. So let's go on. So these are the 9 dimensions of the pattern system. I'm going to just show you one little cool thing about the pattern system. If you look at this chart on the right, I hope it's large enough for you to see it. You will see that on the right side, these are what I call hard patterns. And hard patterns tend to be more aggressive and tend to cause other people pain. Of course, they cause us pain too, but it's usually more indirect. Whereas the soft patterns are on the left side, and they tend to be more passive, and they tend to more obviously cause us pain. So if you have a controlling pattern, you may not even realize that you have a controlling pattern, and yet other people are going to be saying, oh man, that person is always trying to be in charge, and it's really a problem. Whereas if you have a people-pleasing pattern, you're more likely to realize, oh my God, I'm pleasing people all the time, and I never get my needs met. So that's why and these tend to be more passive, and these tend to be more aggressive. And then there's also this column is the self-supporting capacities. These are capacities that help you to assert yourself and feel good about yourself, or take care of yourself. I should have added that, actually. Feel good about yourself or take care of yourself, which are all good. And these capacities are relational capacities, which tend to help you tend to your connections with other people. So self-support takes care of you, intimacy takes care of your relationship, challenge takes care of you, good communications takes care of your relationship, assertiveness takes care of you, cooperation takes care of your relationship, and so on. So here's a nice little way of seeing how these patterns and capacities fall into these nice little categories. Okay, moving on to the next one. So what might you want to do to help change one of these patterns if you have one? So IFS, Internal Family Systems Therapy, is this really powerful form of therapy that's also user-friendly and easy to use and non-pathologizing. You basically get in touch with different parts of you. So like I said, your people-pleasing part, or your controlling part, or your abandoned child, or your betrayed child, and so on. And IFS is non-pathologizing. It welcomes all parts. It's spiritually oriented. It's really effective at working with trauma as well as other things. It was created, I didn't create it, it was created by Richard Schwartz. And it's spreading all around the country and around the world. There's trainings in IFS all over the place these days. I've taught IFS classes to hundreds of people. These are not professional trainings, although I do also have some classes for IFS therapists. But these are classes where I teach people how to work with IFS on their own or with other people in the class. And I've also written a number of books about IFS, especially self-therapy, which is kind of a manual for how to do IFS on yourself. And it's also very useful for therapists who are learning IFS or brushing up on it. And how do you use IFS to transform a pattern? Of course, I can only go do this very briefly. Sorry, give me a second. I just need to munch on a cracker and take a drink of water. So each pattern is enacted by a part, usually a protector. And a protector is a type of part in IFS that's trying to protect you from being hurt by other people, or trying to protect you from feeling the pain of a wounded inner child part, which is called an exile in IFS. So you get to know the part, the protector, find out what drives it, which is usually either what it's trying to get for you or what it's afraid would happen if it didn't do what it does. That is, please people, or control people, or avoid intimacy, or get dependent on somebody, whatever it might be. Then you discover the exile, the wounded inner child part that this protector is protecting. You get permission from the protector. Excuse me. Let me take a drink of water here for a second. You get permission from the protector to work with the exile. Then you heal the exile there's a whole set of steps in IFS for healing one of these wounded inner child parts. And then you go back to the protector, make sure it's aware that the exile has been healed and is safe and feeling good. And then usually the protector can relax and allow the healthy capacity instead of the pattern. So that's a very, very brief description of how you can use IFS to help transform a pattern. But since, let me just check if anybody's got questions about that. Okay. Oh, lots of questions here. Good. Okay, great, folks. Let me get back to. Okay, I found out that oh, wait a minute, that's all right now. What about the responsibility dimension? You know, I originally had that in the interpersonal dimension group, and I decided that it is partially interpersonal, but I decided that it really belonged more in the personal dimension group. So I decided to not include that any longer in the interpersonal dimension group. So it's still around, it's still important, because the victim pattern is really a crucial one. I just put it in a different dimension group, and so I'm not going to cover it today. So is it possible to acquire a copy of the interpersonal dimension group chart? Yes. If you go to, actually there's two ways. You can go to Self-Therapy Journey and click on the pattern system stuff there, and there's a chart, there's a copy of it there. And then I also have a separate website which kind of outlines the whole pattern system. Let's see. I will make sure, I actually do, oh, you know what? Let me pop this up right now. Hold on. Pop-ups. Select offer. Okay, load. Okay, I've just displayed a link to Self-Therapy Journey, which is this web application I've developed that's based on both the pattern system and IFS. And you can click on that link and go there and look around. And as you're looking around, you will see information on the pattern system in a number of places. If you click on that, or there's also a place where it just says you want to start a new pattern, click here. You can click on that, and then you'll see one of the options is the interpersonal patterns. So you'll see a copy of it there. That's probably the best way to get to it. Okay, let me go back to chat here. Okay, so that was that. All right, good. So now we're back. So now Self-Therapy Journey is another way. Well, it's actually, it's not another way because it also uses IFS, but it's a, so if you want to learn IFS and do it on yourself, you can read my book, Self-Therapy. You can take one of my IFS classes, which I'm going to be teaching starting in the fall, or you can even get a recorded version of the class if you don't want to wait till then. Or you can go into therapy with an IFS therapist. There's lots of different ways. Or you can do Self-Therapy Journey. Self-Therapy Journey is an online tool for personal growth and psychological healing. As I said, it's based on both IFS and the pattern system. It's very inexpensive compared to therapy. And Self-Therapy Journey has modules on most of the interpersonal patterns and capacities. So you can work on one of those modules, and that will help you to learn a lot more about your pattern. Let's say you're working on a pattern, including to learn about the underlying motivations that drive the pattern, because you can actually, well, I actually list the common ones for each pattern, but I also have a recorded guided meditation where it actually takes you through a section of an IFS session where you actually go inside and make contact with that part that enacts the pattern and get to know it and find out what its underlying motivations are, its fears or desires that drive the pattern. And then in the next step, you can actually get in touch with the emotional wounds that underlie those fears and needs and do some steps to heal those emotional wounds, which are types of exiles if you know IFS. And then in addition, with that Self-Therapy Journey, you can learn about the healthy capacity that transforms each pattern. I showed you that in the pattern system. That's built into Self-Therapy Journey. So for example, if you're working on the intimacy avoiding pattern, stage 1, you'll learn about the pattern and its underlying motivations. Stage 2, you'll work on the underlying wounds behind it. Stage 3, you'll learn about the intimacy capacity that transforms the intimacy avoiding pattern. And I won't bother with stage 4, but in stage 5, you actually get to create a real-time practice in your life where you practice activating the healthy capacity instead of the pattern and in some particular situation that's coming up in your life. So if you were working on the intimacy avoiding pattern and you found that you tended to avoid intimacy when you and your partner are in bed at night, you could use that as your practice situation, and you could actually practice being intimate in whatever way you would like with your partner rather than avoiding intimacy at that time. So, and Self-Therapy Journey will actually help you set up that whole practice and help you track it. So it really helps you to do the practice. And I also recommend if you get Self-Therapy Journey, feel free to do it on your own if you like to work alone, but I also recommend that many people really do much better at doing this kind of thing if they have a buddy or a friend who's working with them. And I also have an online community that's connected to Self-Therapy Journey. So if you don't have a friend, you can go on there and find somebody to buddy with you to do Self-Therapy Journey. Okay, so this kind of completes what I wanted to say about the interpersonal patterns. But just to let you know, that's not all there is to the pattern system. Here's 2 more dimension groups, and I've actually added a 4th one which isn't even enough developed to put in here yet, but here's the inner critic dimension group with a bunch more patterns and capacities. Here's a personal dimension group with a bunch more, and so on. And in the pattern system, there are also a number of emotional wounds, which come from the way you were treated in childhood or the way it left you feeling. So you could have an abandonment wound or attack wound if you were physically abused or yelled at a lot. You could have a basic deficiency wound if you were made to feel fundamentally like there was something wrong with you. Some people call this shame. I use shame for what some people call embarrassment. Anyway, you can see betrayal, domination, exploitation, guilt. If you were judged, if you were deprived, so you feel needy, if you were not seen, if you were rejected, if you ended up feeling unlovable, or if you were violated. All these are different kinds of emotional wounds, and these are all part of the pattern system, and they're also all built into self-therapy journey. Okay, so let me just check, see if, okay, more questions, great. Will you cover the personal patterns anytime soon? Okay, so if you're interested in the responsibility dimension, I did a webinar on the victim pattern, which is, and the responsibility capacity is what transforms the victim pattern. So I recommend watching that webinar, or you could actually go into self-therapy journey, which does have the victim pattern and the responsibility capacity, and you could actually work that pattern and capacity. Or I'm going to show you in a minute some books that you can get if you prefer books. How do you know where to start? Well, one of the places with self-therapy journey, we have a number of really cool quizzes. So you can take, there's 2 quizzes on patterns, one for interpersonal patterns and one for personal patterns. You can take either of those. There's also 2 quizzes for capacities, one for interpersonal capacities and one for personal capacities. And there's also a quiz for wounds. So you can take any one of those to help you learn where you might want to start. Is it better to learn about the wound first or the pattern? It's generally better to start with a pattern, because that goes along with the IFS principle that it's usually better to start with a protector and then get to the exile. Because you want to approach exiles or wounds carefully and respectfully, because sometimes there's a lot of pain there. And if you try to barge in too quickly, you can get barraged with protectors blocking your way. So yeah, it's unless you're really clear on a particular wound that you really know you want to work on, I would recommend starting with a pattern or a capacity. Can you email us the additional patterns from the previous slide? Those are also available on Self-Therapy Journey site. So you can just go on the site. You'll see that there's links to all 3 of those pattern dimension groups. Sorry. Karen, I've done all the quizzes, but don't know whether to look at wounds or patterns. And should I look at the ones with the highest scores in the quiz? Yes, that's the point of the quizzes. If you take a quiz, the patterns that have the highest scores are probably the ones that you would want to start with first. But also use your own sense of which ones seem to be causing you the most problems in your life. That might not always be the one with the highest score. So I would just read about the patterns and then think about how they play out in your life and which ones you most strongly want to change. I would go on that even more than the highest scores will tell you which pattern you probably have the most strongly, but they won't necessarily tell you which one's most important to you to change. So that's that's more based on your own sense of what matters to you most, which is always the best way to start when you're doing work on yourself, because if you work on what matters to you most, you're more likely to stick with it. Okay, then the last page is some books. So there's a book I've written called The Pattern System, which also contains all of these charts and a lot more information about all the patterns and capacities and wounds and a lot of other stuff about the pattern system. And then I have a book called Conflict, Care, and Love, which covers 4 dimensions of the pattern system and their patterns and capacities. It's actually the first 4 on the chart: intimacy, conflict, power, and care. It covers those 4 dimensions. And then if you want to learn IFS, get my book Self-Therapy. And then there's also 3 booklets actually, that I've written that cover specific patterns and their corresponding capacities. So the Embracing Intimacy covers the intimacy-avoiding pattern. A Pleaser No Longer covers the people-pleasing pattern. And Beyond Caretaking covers the caretaking pattern. And that's it. Okay, I'm not done, but that's it for the slideshow. So let me go back and see. Okay. All right, so if anybody else has any other questions or sharing, pop them in the chat. I'll wait another few seconds to see if anybody does. And if not, we are finished. So I want to thank you all for sticking around and being interested, and I especially thank the people who have been chatting with me in the chat. I really appreciate that. I feel like it really helps to enrich the webinar. And you will be, everybody who registered for the webinar will get 2 emails coming up. One that has a link to a replay of the webinar. So if you didn't see all of it, or if you want to review it, you can play it again. And of course, all the people who didn't attend but signed up can review it. And then you also get a second email that has all these resources, but actually the links where you can find all of them, which I can't put in the webinar, but you'll get an email with all these links to these things. So Paul, thank you, Jay. This resonates well with me on many levels. Great, thank you, Paul. Okay, so I guess that's it for today. Thanks, everybody. And oh, let's see, here's well worth staying up till 2 a.m. Wow. Nice chatting with you all. Great. Thanks, Karen. So I will probably be doing more webinars probably every few weeks. So feel free to join me again. And I've got some really interesting classes by video conference coming up in the fall. So you can do them from anywhere. So you'll be on my email list if you've done that. So keep checking the emails I send out, and I'd love to work with some of you in the classes that I'm going to be teaching this fall. Okay, thanks everybody, and bye for now.